Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Energy and Resources Institute and TERI School of Advanced Studies, India, in collaboration with New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, Japan, and Indigenous Information Network, Kenya, I welcome you to this UNFCCC official side event titled Climate Action Through Innovation, Implementation, and Inclusive Multi-Level Governance. The event aims to bring together experts from leading organizations across the globe to look at the policy areas that need multi-level governance approaches. Before going into the deliberation, I would like to request all panelists to officially launch TERI Act for Earth policy briefs on oceans climate interface and internationalizing lifestyles for environment. These policy briefs were prepared as part of the activities under COP27 Compass and SDG Charter components, respectively, of the Act for Earth initiative. The Act for Earth initiative was launched at the valedictory session of the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit and is a knowledge initiative of TERI. Thank you, panelists. I would request all the panelists to adhere the time slot which has been assigned to you. Timer on the screens in front of you. To begin the event proceedings, I would now like to introduce Mr. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow at the Energy and Resource TERI. Mr. Rashmi was India's principal negotiator for climate change negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change for several years and was part of climate change policy making in India in the run-up to and after the Paris Agreement. He was also the Special Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in the Government of India. I request Mr. R. Rashmi to take over as the chair for the deliberations. Over to you, Mr. Rashmi.
Thank you, Sonali. Can I come there? A very good morning to all of you. The esteemed and distinguished panelists here, and they represent a diverse group of research, academia, industry, civil society, government, and the participants to this program, to this discussion today. Let me first warmly welcome you on behalf of TERI and our partner organizations here, NEDO, the Indigenous Information Network, the ZENAB for Women Development Organization, Ilpolei Twala Cultural Manyata Women Group, and of course a number of others, for example, Columbia University, the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. So all of you, we thank for their support and in helping us organize this event on this very important subject of climate action through innovation, implementation and inclusive multi-level governance. Now, let me just broadly try to indicate why we are discussing this subject. This event we have organized primarily with a view to bring in focus the relevance and role of different stakeholders in pushing our ambition and establishing a framework of governance for achieving the climate goals that we have set for ourselves under the Paris Agreement. Now, it was under the Paris Agreement for the first time that we recognize the role of other stakeholders other than the governments. Till 2015, it was primarily the governments which were driving the entire process for negotiations and consultations on the climate change. And in the wake of Paris Agreement, for the first time, they have recognized the role not just of the corporates and businesses, but the civil society, the academia, the industries, and all other organizations which work at the grassroots level, the communities. And it is in recognition of this, as you may have seen, that there are so many partnerships and alliances which are formally now recognized under the UNFCCC and who are present here, which are adding to this push, this ambition, and this organized effort to raise our climate goals. Some of the questions which we will be posing to our esteemed panelists in this context would be, how is it that we can bring more innovations which can drive these changes towards mitigation and adaptation? What paradigm shifts are required in the global processes on climate change? We have a GST, global stock taking place next year. So in anticipation of the GST, is there something else that we need to bring this transformational shift in our thinking on climate change? How can multi-level governance approaches help us in this? How can we involve all the stakeholders in this process and take their inputs to the negotiating process? And very specifically, what is the role of the indigenous communities? The communities at the grassroots level, which can inform not just the governments, but the businesses and other stakeholders as well. We have already released some documents which give you an idea of the work we have done at TERI under the COP27 Compass and Act for Earth initiative. We have partners, as I mentioned, from NEDO, from Indigenous Information Network, who will be speaking here today. NEDO's focus will be on the technologies, particularly on renewable energy. Of course, I leave it to my panelists to elaborate on the subject. Indigenous Information Network will share grassroots experience on the development issues. To begin this entire process of discussion and consultations, let me begin by first inviting TERI for the knowledge case presentation before we discuss the technologies and the contribution of the communities. Now, TERI will be represented by Dr. Shailly Kedia, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Sustainable Development Research and Leadership at TERI. She'll give you a broad outline of what we have done at TERI in terms of these ideas under different dimensions. And let me first invite her. Over to you, Shailly.
Mr. Rashmi, and thank you all of you for being here. Am I audible? Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'd just like to say that thank you again to everyone for being here, despite this being the second week. I'm sure many of you have been here for a while. So I'll jump straight to my presentation, which will focus on the findings of COP Compass and SDG Charter, which are two components under Act for Earth initiative. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just to give you an overview of Act for Earth, Act for Earth was launched as a knowledge initiative at the World Sustainable Development Summit, which is an annual flagship event organized by TERI every year since 2001. The last summit edition was the 21st edition, and in the valedictory session, we launched this knowledge initiative. The objective of this initiative is basically to amplify voices from the global south on important issues concerning climate action as well as sustainable development, and hence we have the two components, COP27 Compass as well as SDG Charter. So under COP27 Compass, we looked at the climate negotiations and the issues on the agenda items which were of interest to the global south. These include the global goal on adaptation, loss and damage, as well as climate finance and the global stocktake. Along with that, we looked at the ocean climate interface specifically from the lens of global commons, because this is an area where, which has not received as much focus from the global south. Under SDG Charter, we looked at internationalizing lifestyles, specifically in the context of SDG 12, and also looked at inclusive energy transitions in the context of SDG 7. And the approach for the Act for Earth is through research as well as dialogue and stakeholder validation. And next slide, please. So we did organize 5 dialogues under Act for Earth, in the past 3 months. Along with the fact that we engaged with stakeholders, including the COP27 presidency, UNFCCC, but also like institutions from Egypt and large number of institutions from India. Next slide, please. I would like to begin by acknowledging our funders. I'd like to begin by acknowledging our funders, which is Bloomberg Philanthropies, Rockefeller Foundation, Tata Clean Tech Capital, the German Environment Ministry, and also I would like to acknowledge the team. So apparently there seems to be some problem.
These slides are not moving.
Yes, so I'd like to acknowledge the study team, which comprised of 23 researchers from TERI, as well as 7 reviewers and advisors. So in total, we, 30 colleagues from TERI were involved in this endeavor, because it looked at a diverse range of topics.
I think you can continue, Shailly.
Okay. So, so basically, I mean, we can't cover all the 4 the research from all the 4 briefs in detail, but just very broadly, I just wanted to like sort of give you a flavor of what were the key insights from these 4 briefs. So, I mean, I'd just really appreciate it if it could be projected. So if you could just go to the 4th slide, please. Yeah, this is the study team. Next slide. Yes, thank you so much. So first is the road to Sharm el-Sheikh. We launched this brief ahead of COP27, because this is really the road to Sharm el-Sheikh. And the headline message, so I'd just like to have one headline message from each policy brief, is that actually a paradigm shift is needed in the climate regime. And specifically when it comes, we need to redefine vulnerability to move from a country-centric approach to a people-centric approach in climate negotiations. So far, we really sort of talk about benefiting countries, but it's actually the people who need to be benefited, and whether they come from climate vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, MSMEs, etc. So this is where, our headline message is for, from this policy brief. Next slide, please. On the 4 specific issues that we looked at, previous slide, please. So the first one is the global goal on adaptation. Previous slide. Previous. Thank you. No, previous. Yes. So one of the expectation from the Global South is securing basic universal enablers on adaptation at all scales. For example, at least one could be universal access to early warning systems. And again, when we talk about universal access, this again puts people in the center. The other thing is, just like the SDGs, we need to have set defined targets, but also kind of learn from the experience of SDGs, because many of the SDGs don't have all input, output, and outcome indicators. We do need to have that from the global goal and adaptation. On loss and damage funding also, people-centric approach is important to understand who loses and what damage do they suffer. Again, taking a sectoral approach such as agriculture and access to basic human services for human well-being. In climate finance, the polluters pay principle should be key for equitable climate finance. And it is actually ironic that the Global South is paying to solve the problem, is taking finance in the form of loans and is paying to solve the problems they did not cause. We see from the recent OECD data that much of this climate finance is in the form of loans. So we also need to recognize the limitations of market-based instruments, especially when it comes to adaptation finance. And new instruments such as debt restructuring can be considered as well. Then we come to the global stocktake, which should be firmly rooted in the principles of equity and climate justice based on historical responsibility and cumulative emissions. And we feel that climate finance should be the heart and soul of GST and must be reported at disaggregated levels of mitigation, adaptation, but also loss and damage. Next slide, please. Then we come to internationalizing lifestyle for environment. And the headline message here is that consumers can have a power, so the demand or the consumer segment downstream can be key to driving innovation upstream. But by this innovation, I don't only mean technological and business innovations, but also policy innovations. And for example, the right to repair or a rights-based approach is one key example where consumers can be empowered to sort of demand policy change. Next slide. We looked at this policy brief specifically for G20 countries. We developed an index called Lifestyles and Consumption Index. And we, of course, found that India had the lowest consumption in the G20 countries, and the US has the highest. But in terms of internationalizing lifestyles, it can be taken up as an issue for the G20 forum, which India is taking, and it's a cross-cutting issue across many working groups and the themes covered within those working groups. But also the Global Indicator Framework on SDGs can report on more downstream indicators. Along with that, lifestyles can be considered as an issue area under Substa of UNFCCC. Also, perhaps an attempt can be made to have the UN General Assembly mandate a Secretary General's report on life. So these are the channels. In terms of the landscape of G20 countries, what we find is in terms of policy instruments, different countries have deployed different types of policy instruments, and there is scope for doing much more. And there are emerging innovations such as the right to repair, which India also has taken forward. Other key messages are that SDG 12 indicators should have more downstream indicators of resource value chains, and there is a scope for deployment of all types of instruments, policy instruments, market instruments, but also social instruments. The advertising sector is a sector which has where we need to push for norms of responsible advertising, and this segment is somewhat overlooked in current discourses. Also, traditional knowledge may inspire behavioral interventions and insights. And when we talk about behavioral change and lifestyles, we need to look at both adaptation as well as mitigation behaviors. Next slide, please. So when we come to the inclusive energy transitions, what the headline message is: climate justice demands factoring inclusiveness across energy systems, which include both energy supply and demand. What we see in the recent discourse is that the whole just transitions discussion is more focused on the energy supply side, but we also need to realize that in the demand side, when we look at agriculture, MSME, that is where inclusion is also needed, and that is where people are there. So again, coming back to the broader people-centric approach. Next slide, please. So this again brief, we examined this for G20 countries, and we see that at an aggregate level, the energy consumption on the demand side has increased in the last 20 years. The dominant narrative on energy transitions focuses on the supply side, and demand side dimensions, including in the agriculture sectors and MSMEs, is losing rather, the focus in recent discourses. And so there needs to be a course correction there. And reliable energy supply is also important when we look at demand, demand side energy interventions. The other gap which we found is gender disaggregated data. There is very little gender disaggregated data when it comes to informing inclusive energy transition measures on energy supply, energy demand side, especially when it comes to the three sectors of MSMEs, agriculture, as well as transport. And what we feel is G20, and India is taking the presidency in December this year, it can push for global indicators frameworks on SDGs to report and monitor on energy demand side indicators beyond lighting and cooking, along with this gender disaggregated data on the same. Next slide, please. Now we come to the final policy brief, which is the oceans climate interface, and this really looks at the oceans climate interface from the global commons lens. So when we look at global frameworks such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, it offers very minimal guidance on climate change. Similarly, existing frameworks under the UNFCCC lack a mandate on high seas, through this paper, we argue that the shift is needed in the climate oceans interface to incorporate greater synergies beyond Rio Conventions, the Rio Conventions, but to also include the UNCLOS. Next slide, please. So what we see is that despite the original mandate of the UNFCCC under Article 4.1D, this is the 1992 convention, where it clearly recognized oceans action as a sink. Most of the COP discussions ignored oceans. In the post-Paris climate regime, with the publication of IPCC special report on ocean and cryosphere, there has been a surge of interest in bringing oceans to the forefront of UNFCCC deliberations, and that's where we have the Oceans Climate Dialogue. And there is a clear consensus that oceans play a critical role in climate change negotiations, and this is clearly recognized also in the Glasgow Climate Pact. Now, what we feel is that in the Global Indicator Framework on SDGs, which is presently reported under Goal 14, they do not sufficiently cover high seas and area beyond national jurisdiction, especially when it comes to climate action. There's also need to strengthen international coordination and integration of ocean observation, and along with strengthening interface between the climate regime and the ocean regime. Even in this space, if you've seen, for instance, you can have other organizations like UNDP and other specialized agencies within the UN system talking about oceans, but then where is UNCLOS? We can have CBD, we have a BBNJ, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, a very ambitious treaty which is still currently under negotiations. But then we also need to have, unless and until we have UNCLOS, there won't be a strong ocean climate interface. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and coming back to the topic of this session. So innovations can span across domains as well as levels. So we look at lifestyles, which involves individuals, communities, organizations, markets, policies, and technologies. And a holistic approach, but also context-specific approach is needed. Implementation needs to be informed by policy, needs to consider policy instruments, market instruments, social instruments, as well as continued science policy interface. When it comes to equity, we need to consider all aspects, including distributional equity, procedural equity, but also recognition equity in terms of the outcomes. We can have so much tokenism as to involve various stakeholder groups and constituencies, but then these need to really reflect in the outcome document. When we talk about governance, looking from individual areas of domains such as lifestyles to global commons and the ocean climate interface, we do need polycentric multi-level governance, as well as enhanced international support for climate action, and no country can act alone on this. So, next slide. Thank you so much. These were interesting.
Thank you, Shailly, for your presentations on the kind of work done by TERI with its partners on the issues which are which you have highlighted. For example, the interface between climate and the oceans, and the lifestyle issues, and the issues of equity, finance, adaptation, and global stock take, which are going to be addressed here. Thank you once again. With this, we now I'll go over to the panelists and request them for their opening remarks. Each one of them for the first remarks will be 5 minutes, and then we will go over to the discussants who will react to their interventions. There is a slight change in the order of speaking because Ms. Lucy Mulenkei has to leave perhaps. So let me first invite her. Ms. Lucy Mulenkei is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Information Network, and she is from Kenya, from the Maasai tribe, and her expertise lies in the sustainable development of Kenya's pastoral communities, indigenous communities in Kenya. And she has been working at the grassroots level with various organizations in East Africa, America, Canada, Asia. So she has a large pool of experience of having worked with the grassroots communities. So let me invite her to give her opening remarks, and then we open the discussion.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to the event. I think this is the most wonderful time that the UNFCCC had to ask us to merge and to have partners, because this has also created new partnership with other new organizations and with a different experience. For us, Indigenous Information Network plus the other organization, the International Indigenous Peoples of the Tropical Forest, we are on the social side where we are looking at different issues, looking at them and relating them to the communities. We work with the indigenous communities and indigenous and local communities, both in Kenya, where I come from, and the East Africa and the region as a whole, and also at the international level where we have different countries, because we work in the 7 regions of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. But specifically, if I talk about Indigenous Information Network, we work with different groups on different issues, especially on environment, following up the Climate Change Convention, the CBD Convention, the UNCCD, the Convention on Desertification. There are 3 Rio conventions which are really very important to us. At the same time, even though we mention those conventions, at the community level, indigenous women know, and they are pastoralists, some of them are hunter-gatherers, and some are minorities doing also farming and so on, agro-pastoralism. So we work in different issues in terms of looking at social development and also sustainable development goals, issues of energy, where it's local energy, of trying to make sure that they have local energy, innovation on their local energy, so that they can be able to manage themselves. So we have different activities that we work. At the same time, on the policy level, we try as much as possible to train women and the youth, and also some elders, to be able to participate in policy making. And that's why in this particular conference of parties in the climate change, we do bring different indigenous women from the rural level. As you can see, some of them here from the Sahel, some are from Sudan, some are from Kenya, and different other countries where they come together to participate in these particular conferences, so that they can be able to give their own ideas, not Lucy speaking for them, but for them being able to speak and give their own ideas. So today you'll be able to listen to some of them. And when we look at the issues of innovations, we are always very happy, because the indigenous women down at the grassroots level, just as you have in different countries, they are very innovative. And even the local communities, whether in Japan or in India or in any other different countries, they really innovate themselves, and they try to manage as much as possible. In Africa, for example, they've been innovating in different ways, as I mentioned, on energy, as I mentioned, on issues of development. They try as much as possible to innovate for themselves. Of course, we have challenges because the climate change has also come to change the face of the people. Pastoralists normally were depending mainly on livestock production. But as climate change has hit on them and they have lost their livestock and the ecosystem is very fragile, they have also tried to adapt other new ways of livelihoods. And we learn from each other because we have other communities who are farmers, others who are doing different activities, economic activities. So we learn from each other in exchanging. And this is very important for us because if you learn from each other, they tend to learn more. Because most of the communities we work with are illiterate. They are not, almost 70% are illiterate. Actually, they have not been to formal school, so, but they learn and they have more knowledge because we believe in our traditional knowledge. We believe in what is already the nature-based solutions at the ground level. And that is what gives us more hope and more strength in terms of working with the communities. We also find that it's very important to work with these communities and enhance their participation because they go themselves and they innovate and try to talk to the policymakers at their ground level. They start from their ground level to the national, and of course now when they come to the international, they also know how to be able to really look at different issues and multi-level governance that is already discussed in different level. We have our own multi-level governance at the community level, at the national level and the international level when we come together as different indigenous people from different areas. So this is a very, very important process which we believe, and we want to say that we would like to continue to learn. For example, what already has been presented about energy, about what the other colleagues here are going to present, is something that we would love to continue working together so that we can see where we can strengthen our weakness and also we can share our successes that we have already. So I think it's a good opportunity, and I wouldn't like to take a lot of time so that at least my colleagues who are here, I think we have Fatima from Sudan and Rosemary and Faith will continue discussing with you, and those ones who are already there, already sitting with us. Thank you very much all, and really special thanks for you all agreeing to partner with us and to be able to work together. Thank you.
Lucy, you have some more time, so you are free to share your experiences. After that, I'll go to the other panelists. But if you want, I can proceed further. Thank you very much for this overview of the kind of work that you are doing in East Africa. And that's really very critical, involving these local communities in the process of sustainable development. That is really key to maintaining balance between the ecosystem and our economic and social growth. Now I would like to invite the speakers from NEDO and their associates. They will have about 15 minutes, and they have 3 speakers who will be focusing on different aspects of energy, decarbonization and other aspects. So first let me invite Mr. Takashi WADA. He is the Executive Director of NEDO. Since 2021, and he has tremendous experience in the areas of information technology policies and safety regulation policies, and he has worked on the industrial trend research overseas in New York and Geneva. So you have 5 minutes, Mr. WADA, and after that I'll go to your other colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Hashimi. I'm Takashi WADA, Executive Director of the New Energy and Industrial Technology Development Organization, NEDO. NEDO is R&D funding agency, so I would like to talk about how to Japan and tackling with achieve carbon neutrality from the viewpoint of research and development. Next slide, please. Okay. So my organization is NEDO. established in 1980s and one of the largest R&D funding agency in Japan. And our mission is to address energy and global environmental problems and to enhance industrial technology. Next slide, please. Yes, NEDO covers a wide range of the technology fields. You can see on the left-hand side, critical technology, renewable energy, energy conservation development, rechargeable batteries, smart energy systems are included in the energy and environmental fields. On the right-hand side, the design of new generation IC chips, biofuels, carbon nanotubes, and other nanotechnology, robots, IoT, drones are in the lineup of the industrial fields on the right-hand side. New industry creation and promotion of entrepreneurship programs covers both sides. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the Japanese to carbon neutrality policies. In October 2020, Japan declared it aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. To implement this declaration, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry formulated the Green Growth Strategy. This strategy aims to make the green technology promotion and economical growth at the same time. Designate 14 promising growth sectors as a key driver for the carbon neutral. Next slide, please. To implement the green growth strategy, government of Japan created a 7.6 billion fund. This is the Green Innovation Fund in NEDO in March 2021. This picture is taken from the 18 projects we have adopted so far. Zero-emission ships, hydrogen aircraft. Next slide, please. And other. Next slide, please. Offshore wind power for new generation photovoltaic solar cells. The liquefied hydrogen mega ship carriers are now included in our Green Innovation Fund projects. Next slide, please. I would like to talk about some of the NEDO's international cooperation activities, starting from the Joint Credit Mechanism Demonstration Project. A Japanese company wants to implement JSM project, demonstration project. It needs to have a partner in the developing countries. In the JSM project, diffusion of the leading decarbonizing technology, product systems, services, and infrastructures are included in the demonstration. After the completing demonstration project, the GHG emission removals or reductions achieved from this project will be quantitatively measured and evaluated and calculated as a JSM credit. Those JSM credits will be shared between Japan and the partnering country. Next slide, please. We have implemented 8 JSM demonstration projects so far in Mongolia, in Thailand, in Laos, and Vietnam, and Indonesia. We have 1 ongoing pre-demonstration project in Saudi Arabia and 2 demonstration projects in Thailand. Next slide, please. In addition to the JSM demonstration project, we have an energy-related demonstration project all over the world. We have implemented about 100 projects since 1993. These 6 pictures are taken from the recent demonstration project. Next slide, please. So at the last, but at the least, the discussion among the government, industry, and academia is very important to discuss measures to promote innovation in the field of energy and environment to solve climate change issues. This forum is named Innovation for Cool Earth Forum. NEDO and METI have been organized this forum since 2014, and on this year's ISEF, this October, about 1,687 countries or regions participated and discussed about the theme, this year's theme, low carbon innovation in the time of the crisis. So following my presentation, Mr. Sandalow he is a member of the ISEF steering committee, will introduce the technological roadmap discussed at the ISEF about the fuel ammonia. So NEDO tried to continue to solve the global climate change issues with government, industry, and academia. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. WADA, for introducing NEDO to us and telling us about the initiatives taken by NEDO in various fields of technology and new innovations, new ideas which you are trying to promote. I mean, I noticed that you have pledged almost $17.5 billion for technology innovations, and that's much larger than Green Climate Fund, I must tell you. So that's quite interesting. With this, let me invite Mr. David Sandalow, who is the inaugural fellow of the Center on Global Energy Policy at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. He is not an unknown face and may already be known to some of you. Mr. Sandalow is, I think, going to speak to us through a video message. Just to introduce him, Mr. Sandalow is a very well-known energy expert and policy expert in the US. He has served in senior positions at the White House, and he has also directed the US-China program earlier at the center, and he is now chairing the ISEF Innovation Roadmap project and associated with NEDO in that capacity. So can we have the video message from Sandalow up on the screen, please?
Hi, my name is David Sandalow, and I'm a professor at Columbia University in New York City, a member of the steering committee of the Innovation for Cool Earth Forum, and the chair of the ISEF Roadmap Project. I'm sorry that a long-standing commitment in another part of the Blue Zone prevents me from joining you in person today, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak for a few minutes by video about the ISEF Roadmap Project and our latest release. The ISEF Roadmap Project is 7 years old, and we have released now 11 roadmaps, including the one I'm going to tell you about right now, and and another one also being released at this conference. Yesterday, we released a roadmap on low-carbon ammonia. And so I'll just start with the basics. Ammonia is a chemical compound with 1 nitrogen atom and 3 hydrogen atoms. NH3 is the formula. It's a building block of modern society. Ammonia plays a critical role in fertilizers, which much of modern agriculture depends on. Ammonia is also an important feedstock for a number of chemicals, for explosives, and plastics, and for much more. Ammonia is a colorless gas. It's got a strong odor. At room temperature, it is a gas with small amounts of refrigeration or pressure. It turns into a liquid, which makes it very easy to handle. And critical point for us, almost 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of ammonia, which shows its central role in the global economy in many ways. And most of those greenhouse gas emissions come from the separation of hydrogen from feedstocks like natural gas or coal. Now, those emissions can be reduced or even eliminated with a couple of different methods. One of them is often referred to as green ammonia, and that's using zero carbon energy, such as renewable energy, and to generate electric currents through water. It's called electrolysis, and that can be a source of hydrogen. Another way of making carbon-free nitrogen is so-called blue production method, which involves carbon capture and storage. And then finally, biomass feedstocks can be used as well. Now, low-carbon ammonia can help decarbonize a range of sectors. And by low-carbon ammonia, I mean ammonia that's made with a low-carbon method. The first and most important thing to do is we can replace conventional ammonia, which is made in a very polluting way, with low-carbon ammonia, and that could potentially get rid of almost 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Pretty significant contribution. Then, in addition, once we've made ammonia with this low-carbon method, the ammonia can be used to replace some carbon-based fuels. The shipping sector is one particularly promising area here, where carbon-based fuels are currently used almost exclusively. They create greenhouse gas emissions. If we substitute low-carbon ammonia, that could help to cut down on emissions from the shipping sector, and there's a lot of work going into this. So in our roadmap, we have lots of details. We have 9 different chapters. I don't have time to get into them here, but I'll just talk briefly about some of our findings and recommendations. Our first most important finding is that low-carbon ammonia could produce significant greenhouse gas reductions in this decade and deep reductions by 2050. So this is an area that deserves attention from policymakers and from businesses. And in fact, the Japanese government is already doing this, importing low-carbon ammonia to co-fire coal plants and help reduce emissions from coal-fired power plants. A second finding is there are no technical barriers to producing low-carbon ammonia in large volume before 2030. We know how to do this. The issue is not technological innovation. The chief barrier is cost. Currently, it's expensive to make low-carbon ammonia, and we need to find ways to bring down the cost. And a fourth key finding is that the environmental and safety risks appear to be quite manageable from this. Ammonia is a toxic chemical. It's poisonous if breathed in large quantities. But there's a large global industry that knows how to handle this, and there's a lot of learning about how to safely handle ammonia, which can be employed as this industry scales up. So bottom line, there are risks, but they need to be managed, but they can be managed. And then we offer a number of recommendations that governments should provide incentives for low-carbon ammonia supply, that governments should launch public-private partnerships to plan, develop, and finance key infrastructure for low-carbon ammonia, and governments and industries should invest in innovations for the use of low-carbon ammonia. Another very important recommendation we make is that policy incentives should be based upon the life cycle carbon intensity of the ammonia, not on the color. We recommend that governments don't simply say any green ammonia qualifies for an incentive, because sometimes so-called green ammonia can actually have higher carbon emissions than the alternative. Governments should look at the actual life cycle carbon intensity of ammonia in providing policy incentives. So that's a very brief summary of our roadmap. If you're interested, please go to the ISEF roadmap website, the ISEF website, where you can find this and download it for free. Thank you very much, and good luck for the rest of this session.
Thank you. Let's thank Mr. Sandalow for his presentation, and which was very informative and highly relevant, and it's closely linked to what NEDO is offering to do in a large number of areas where innovation is involved, and this appears to be one of the most having the largest potential in terms of innovation and scale up. With this, the third speaker, as a group of NEDO, is Mr. Takahiko TAGAMI. He is the senior coordinator of the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan. He is also a member of the Joint Implementation Supervisory Committee of the UNFCCC, and he's also lecturing lectures at WACO University. Over to Mr. Takami for telling us what NEDO is doing and what are the potential of interventions and innovations in technology sector.
Thank you, Chair. So the presentation. So the blue carbon is a very important thing to remove carbon dioxide. So we developed in the ISEF framework the blue carbon roadmaps. So next slide, please. So this my presentation consists of two parts. First part is highlights of the blue carbon roadmap, and second part public comment schedule. So the highlights include 5 chapters. So I will introduce these chapters in due course. Next, please. Next slide, please. So the first one, chapter 1, is an introduction, but we have a lot of different definition of blue carbon. So we discussed about the history and the definition of blue carbon. So the blue carbon concept is started with the UNEP 2009 report. So we have broadly 2 categories of blue carbon. Left side is a very traditional blue carbon concept with the seagrass and mangrove and salt marsh. On the right side, we have a little bit emerging blue carbon, so macroalgae farming. This is something like farming of kelp or sargassum, so we can sequestrate the carbon dioxide into the ocean. So next slide, please. So this is a scientific understanding. So the macroalgae farming is a very innovative way to sequestrate the carbon dioxide into the deep sea. So maybe we have a large amount of net primary production by kelp or sargassum, but about 10% of such net primary production can be stored on the shelf or a deep ocean. So this is just emerging technologies to sequestrate the carbon dioxide. So next slide, please. So we have several technologies. We need some innovative technology to scale up the blue carbon. So on the right side, so we have to have a technology to create blue carbon. Next slide, please. So on the right side, we have to have a technology to use such blue carbon. And right side, we have to have a technology to protect the kelp and blue carbon. So maybe urging bites kelp, and so we must have a separate farming systems for such arching. Or maybe sediments of the blue carbon areas will have some enteric methane. So we have to avoid such emissions by asparagus taxidiformias. So the previous, please. Yes, thank you. So the first technologies to measure. So we have innovative technologies to measure, monitoring, and reporting the verification. So we have to have airborne sensors or biologging. So must have such new innovative technologies to be developed to promote blue carbon. So next, please. So, but we have some environmental concerns on such macroalgae farming. So maybe possible impacts from large-scale macroalgae farming on deep sea biological communities. So I have to develop technical and scientific understandings, but we have to have discussion on UNCLOS, a convention on the law of the sea, or a London Convention. So this is our homework to promote blue carbon. Next, please. So this is the potential for blue carbon. So right side, we see some potentials for blue carbon. Black one is sequestration potential, bottom of the left side. So we can see large potential in some coastal blue carbon and seaweed production. But almost 0.5 to 1.2 gigaton of carbon dioxide can be stored in the ocean. On the right side, you can see a marginal abatement cost. So it includes the forest sector. So you can see some light blue areas. It is related to seagrass seaweed farming. So, but the cost of seagrass farming is very high now. But we need some cost reduction to these such technologies. So next slide, please. So this is the roadmap for blue carbon. So we talked about the science and technology and the policy, but we include economy. So I myself are expert on the crediting mechanisms. So we must develop some appropriate crediting mechanisms to promote the blue carbon. Next slide, please. So this is the schedule for public comment. Today, I launched the draft of the blue carbon roadmap, and on Friday we will publish or release a draft roadmap for comment. But this draft very science and technology intensive. So I like to include some social aspects of blue carbon into the blue roadmap by the end of this year. So and we will have a final version of the roadmap at the end of the year. So yes. So on the under the bottom, we can see you can see some authors of this roadmap. So please. Please access to the ISF website for a blue carbon roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takami. That was indeed a wonderful and eye-opener, and a wonderful, very, very important, significant research carried out in the area of blue carbon. This somehow has some resonance with the initial presentation made by Dr. Shailly Kedia on the linkage between climate change and the oceans, and the kind of governance framework that we need to establish to help such technologies and such innovations go forward. And you have rightly mentioned that IPCC methodologies and guidelines will need to be looked at seriously to promote this intervention. Thank you very much. With this, we have come to the end of the initial round of broad presentations by TERI, on Dr. Shailly Kedia on behalf of TERI, the NEDO group of speakers consisting of Mr. WADA, Mr. Sandalow, and Mr. TAGAMI. And of course, we had heard Lucy Mulenkei in the morning. She had to leave because of some engagements. So we have got a broad overview of the kind of interventions and innovations which we need to push from a variety of perspectives, from grassroots, community level, to technology level, and to the broad policy and the governance level. Now that we have got a broad sense of what we can do in the areas and the future negotiations that are going to take place around some of these issues, we have two discussants who will be, I will be requesting them to react to these presentations and the thoughts that have been put out by the panelists. Then we can have a discussion, a free-flowing discussion on that. The first discussant I'll invite is Ms. Fatima Mustafa Ahmed Samheen, who is the president of the Zenab for Women Development. And Fatima is the founder and director of this organization called Zenab for Women in Development. She is from Sudan, where she has been working with several grassroots organizations to promote gender equality, push for poverty alleviation, and she has been interacting and representing these organizations and her country in various international fora. She was awarded Ambassador of Peace Award in 2005 for her countless efforts. So let me invite Fatima Ahmed Samheen for her remarks and what she would like to tell us about her views on the kind of presentations and the ideas which have been put out by the panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to be among all those speakers. Actually, I think we are here just to try to relate what is going on at the international level and the discussion, especially today for, a special discussion about the energy day, and to bring the voice of our local communities. And when it comes to energy, now I hear very good presentations and technology that we hope is going to be part of the solutions for climate change adaptation and mitigation. But for our situation is very sophisticated. I mean for our local communities at this time, because now we struggle at local communities, leaders or people of local communities and indigenous communities, we struggle for basic technology for energy. Like we are part of Africa and everyone knows, especially rural areas, is still no electricity, no means of energy for cooking, is still cutting trees, is still so this we hope first to involve the discussion from bottom up at grassroots level, because also they have innovative ideas of how to deal with energy and their ideas about how to solve this problem, and at the same time to conserve the environment. Because one of the biggest problem now is the cutting trees. I mean, we are in the middle of 22nd century and still no means of energy, only cutting trees. So, and this is the time for reforestation as part of the innovation, and because for climate change, which is real at this grassroots level, and they struggle on daily basis for flooding, or and especially I talk about rural women farmers, and they are majority of those women are engaged in traditional agriculture, which is not good now for this time. I mean, we have to find ways to lift them so they can be able to produce for their families, because climate change not affecting only their production and productivity, their health, their well-being, their education, because one day they can just lost everything if there is flood there, and we have many experience. I really don't want to talk too much, but I hope this technology to tackle down, I mean, and this solution, and also to involve the knowledge of indigenous and local community as part of the solution. And it is time for paradigm shift, and because environment, climate justice, and benefit sharing, I think this is the time. I just want, if you don't mind, to share one of our, because those women are at the ground level, if they get any chance and help, they really help them, and we have success story. I just want to share little video from rural women or women farmers from Gaddarfi state, which is at eastern part of Sudan, when they got help in terms of climate change adaptation, and how this is affect and give them good benefit for more production and to sustain their families. And we hope, I mean, all those inventors for energy, just to look down and to be not long term, I mean, at least for short term, how can we help these communities for energy? And I think in Africa or in Sudan, other part, solar energy can be part of this solution, because we have plenty of sun, but it still is not there for those rural and remote areas, which affect the women's lives and all the community lives. Thank you. I just want him to share the video, if it is possible, for agriculture benefit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Quickly, I don't know how long is the video. If is it short? Do you have the video? Can you put it up on the screen, please?
نحن بحمد الله السنة زرعت 5 فدان، وال5 فدان زرعناها بالتغانة، ويعني الدعم كان جاينا من منظمة زينب. لأول مرة أنا زرعتها، كنت أخذ التجربة دي وزرعت بالتغانة معاهم، وال5 فدان أنتجت لي 60 جوال، باعتبارها يعني رحمة من الله سبحانه وتعالى. يمكن تكون لي دافع إني قررت من هذا اليوم تاني أزرع إلى الأبد. منظمة زينب هي اللي حضرت لنا الأرض، جابت البذور، زرعت، ونحن ما علينا إلا الإشراف والحصاد. نحن الماسك ده هسه في ناس قطعوا له جابوا
So thank you very much for your perspective on the role which women can play. And very importantly, she emphasized the need for providing sustainable and assured supply of energy to the rural communities. Technologies need to be part of the solution rather than simply come as mitigation solutions. So adaptation, ensuring adequate livelihoods and improving the standards of living, that has to be our ultimate goal. And so thank you very much, Fatima ji, for this. Next discussant that I am going to invite is again from East Africa, from Kenya, Ms. Rosemary Nenini. And you can see her, she has a wonderful track record of working with the women's groups. She is a coordinator of Twala Women's Group, which is an umbrella group of 6 women's groups from 2 different areas. And she has been running this group with the support of her community. And she's also a trained permaculture practitioner, which means, sustainable agricultural production practices. So over to you, Rosemary, for sharing your ideas with us and also telling us what you think about the role of technology and innovations here.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosemary Nenini from Kenya, from Twala Cultural Women. I'm from a pastoral sim community in the northern part of Kenya. And the 6 subgroups that form Twala are pastoral sim women, purely local women from indigenous people who are pastoral sim, but because of climatical change, we are trying to come up with sustainable ways of livelihood. And to be able to do that, we need to get land, and we are in a community where land is owned communally. So we try to lobby and ask our men to give us a land, and we got 40 acres. And the 2 or 3 women own the 40 acres, and it is within the 40 acres that we practice our own activities. One of them, we conserve the good part of our culture, we conserve environment, and we are able to do sustainable livelihood there, like the beekeeping project. Through conservation of our culture, we are able to do the beadwork, agriculture, that's greenhouses, practicing organic way of farming, no chemical. To the pastoral sim women who have never do farming, the only source of livelihood was livestock. We are also using biogas that uses cow dung. We don't use firewood, that's for cooking. Yeah, and they conserve environment a lot. And due to that, we are able to get indigenous trees, which are overused in the past years, but due to the conservation of the 40 acres, they germinate again. So we are able to get our indigenous trees for medicinal use and for ceremonial. Yeah, and we're also doing ecotourism, that is showing of the culture. So through that, the local pastoral sim women were able to do sustainable livelihood through greenhouses, through beekeeping project, through the beadwork. And those are some of the innovations ways that we do. We are no longer semi-nomads moving with the livestock. And also, we had reduced the number of livestock, and we are keeping the cows that enable us to use the cow dung for biogases. We also have an NPC plant called quickly pear cacta, or puntia, in northern part of Kenya, which is becoming a disaster because it dominates the land, causing no pasture because it grows all over. And as women, we come with an idea of making biogases using the parts of the cacta, and also making juice and jam using the fruit. We also grow aloe secundiflora, which is an indigenous plant, and very good for cosmetic and medicinal. And we are also using it to produce soaps, lotions, and shampoos, and also for medicinal purposes, and also sell to large cosmetic UK through Laikipia Permaculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nenini. That was indeed very significant that we can use the agriculture, livestock these the economic activities which are conducted by the communities at the grassroots level, we need to look at this in an integrated fashion, whereby we can promote environment and also promote the cause of livelihoods, improve the productivity of farmers, incomes, women and local communities, and at the same time also bring down the greenhouse gases. These are lessons which communities give us. Unfortunately, we have not been able to scale them up or support these activities in the manner which we should, because of our concern with the issues of mitigation, the issues of adaptation and sustainable livelihoods are equally important, which the emerging technologies should be able to help. So there are a number of innovations and technologies which we have discussed today with the help of our eminent panelists. Mr. WADA talked about the role of NEDO in promoting the new innovations in different areas of technologies, and that's an extremely informative, and some of the technologies are really cutting edge technologies, and it will be important to find financial resources as well as the involvement of different research, academia and the governments to make them sustainable. Mr. TAGAMI talked about the blue carbon, and then here comes the role of not just the technology but also the role of governance framework, whereby we can achieve climate objectives and at the same time we ensure international cooperation to be able to promote these interventions in a sustainable and long-term manner. It's very critical. Mr. Sandalow, of course, also talked about the role of green ammonia. In fact, he talked about incentives without looking at the color of the hydrogen. So that's extremely important, and we take that message for countries, major economies like Japan, India and other developing countries in Africa. The hydrogen has to find its place in the scheme of things. We need to build up a hydrogen-based economy irrespective of the color of the gas, and we need to find incentives, as he said, public-private partnership models, and of course the regulatory mandates are required to help it. And then so the role of communities, which have been stressed by 3 women speakers today, that's really significant. Ms. Nenini, Fatima Samheni, and in the morning Lucy Mulenkei, all of them spoke about the involvement of communities and finding sustainable ways of promoting ecosystem based or for promoting the standards of living and finding adequate sources of energy. That really is the key to climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So let me with this thank all my esteemed panelists for their time and their brilliant ideas, for sharing it. We will capture these ideas. I'm sure all our partner organizations will take them forward and integrate them into their own thinking process. So thanks once again to each one of you for being with me on this panel today. And let me now hand it over back to Sonali. Thank you.
Thank you all the panelists for such enriching and insightful discussions.
And a round of applause for all of them.
We will now conclude the event with the closing remarks from Ms. Faith Nataya from Indigenous Information Network, Kenya.
Greetings to everyone. Already our conclusions and a summary of our our panelists has already been made, and so I will just go straight to thanking Mr. Rashmi, who's been our moderator today and has done a fantastic job with our panelists. And to thank also our speakers today for giving your insights, for sharing your experiences, sharing your research and your findings. It's been very important for all of us to be here today to learn from each other. So our innovations, the science, the traditional knowledge, there is an intersection, and we need to find that to integrate together both of these worlds to get a bigger solution to climate change and to contribute to all the concrete contributions to climate change happening all over the world. And secondly, to thank TERI and NEDO for agreeing to merge with us this event today. It's been a learning experience. We're able now to connect and to find new partners. And so we're really happy for that. Thank you very much. And to also thank Sonali and the technical team for making it possible to do our presentations today. And our participants have been amazing. So thank you for being here and making the time to come to listen to our event. So thank you very much to all of you, and a round of applause to our panelists and everyone here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining us today for the event. We would also like to thank to our online viewers. We have few copies of the policy briefs to disseminate. You may please collect the same from us. And the briefs are also available at the WSDS website. Thank you.